A millionaire pays a homeless woman to have a baby, but when the baby is born, he is shocked by what he sees. Please tell us what city you're in before we start the story. Everyone, have fun with the story. Henry Lewis was a 42-year-old man who had it all: money, power, and a high position. But that night, he realized that even though he had a lot of nice things, he couldn't buy an heir. Henry didn't want a family in the traditional sense, but he needed a child. He had tried twice, and both times he was unhappy and failed. He thought love was a lie that only caused trouble. But a child was different. It was an investment and a way to keep everything he had worked for going down. He was now set on not looking for a relationship for this. He needed a clear agreement that didn't involve any feelings, just a contract. He knew that with his money, he could find someone who would carry the baby without asking questions or getting emotionally involved. Henry saw this as a deal, and like all his deals, he would be in charge. He just needed to find someone who would agree to the deal. Henry Lewis drove his sports car through the city streets the following morning. But he was thinking about finding a person who would take the contract. He noticed something on the sidewalk corner while he was stopped at a light close to downtown. A young lady sat on the floor and drew on a soiled piece of paper. Even though she looked exhausted, her blue eyes gleamed, and her disheveled brown hair cascaded over her face. Henry was drawn to her despite the fact that she appeared to be invisible to others. He made an effort to ignore her, but as the light changed to green, he glanced once more and asked himself, who draws on the sidewalk as if nothing else exists? He drove off, leaving her behind, frustrated with himself. However, he was troubled by something a few blocks away. He pulled into a parking lot and sat looking at the steering wheel. He had an idea. He told himself, this is ridiculous, but his instincts held him back. He reluctantly reversed the vehicle and returned to the spot where he had first seen her. She was still there, leaning the paper against the wall. He rolled down the window as he pulled up to the curb. His voice was cold and direct. Hey you, come on over here. The young woman narrowed her eyes and gave him a suspicious look as she assessed the well-dressed driver of the sports car. She paused. I'm not inquiring. He persisted without altering his tone, saying, come on, I don't have all day. Reluctantly and slowly, she came closer. Her thinness and the deterioration of her appearance were even more noticeable when she eventually stood beside the car. Nevertheless, there was something about the way she regarded him and her posture. Her voice was firm but low as she asked, what do you want? After examining her for a moment, Henry answered, enter. I'll take you somewhere so we can talk. She gave a dry laugh. I'm not like that. He scowled, obviously annoyed by the presumption. If that's what you're thinking, avoid being ridiculous. I have no time for that. All I want to do is talk. You can either get in your car now or continue to live on that sidewalk. His authoritative tone made it impossible for her to argue, even though she was still hesitant. At last, she unlocked the door and entered. Henry didn't seem to mind the heavy silence that hung between them in the car. He parked his car at a peaceful cafe far from the bustle of the city. They were sitting at a table in the corner when he asked, what's your name? Leah Parker. But why does it matter? She shot back, maintaining a suspicious expression. Because I must be aware of who I am interacting with. Why do you sit on the sidewalk and draw as though nothing else matters, Layla? She avoided looking at him and shrugged. What else can be done? There is nowhere for me to go. I lost everything. However, that is none of your concern. He put his elbows on the table and leaned forward. I'll get right to the point. I have an offer for you that has the potential to transform your life. She squinted. And what would that be? I would like you to bear me a child. As though she hadn't heard correctly, Layla blinked. You're kidding, right? No, it's a real offer. I'll pay for everything you need, support you completely throughout your pregnancy, and give you a sum that will guarantee you never have to worry about money again. She crossed her arms and laughed nervously. Isn't this a joke? What sort of man extends an offer like that to a complete stranger? The type of man who doesn't waste time and knows what he wants. Lila, I don't want a relationship. Emotional drama is not what I want. Only a kid. It's as easy as that. Leah gazed at Henry as though he was insane. She kept thinking about what he had said. I want my child to be born to you. Something in Henry's eyes told her he was serious, even though she wanted to brush his suggestion aside as ridiculous. Her dignity and the harsh reality of her life were at odds when she was struck hard by his icy logic. At last, Lila said, "This is madness. This is something that no woman in her right mind would consent to." Henry remained fixed on the calculating stance that was so familiar to him. "No woman in your role would say no." He gave a direct response. "In return for something you already have, the capacity to conceive, I'm offering you a way out, comfort, stability, and a new life." Layla crossed her arms in an attempt to appear resistant, but she knew in her heart that he was correct. For her, each day was a battle just to stay alive. Nevertheless, the thought of parting with something so intimate for financial gain made her stomach turn. With a tone full of doubt, she questioned, "And then what? After the baby is born, what happens?" As though he had foreseen the question, Henry leaned back a little in his chair. "You'll get a sizable payment to start over after the baby is born, with no conditions attached. You will have complete freedom to do as you please." Layla laughed without humor. "And how can I be sure you won't decide to drag me into court later?" Before responding, he gave her a close examination. "I'm a businessman, Layla. I never sign contracts before making sure everyone wins. A legally binding contract will be in place. After that, neither of us will be able to alter the terms. Now, let's play around with people who just read the comments. In the comments, type milkshake. Only readers who have read this far will comprehend." Returning to Layla, stopped talking as she took in what he had said. Even if it was only temporary, the prospect of security was alluring. Now, she had nothing, not even a bed to sleep on that night. However, she was also aware that she was about to make a decision that would change her life. She leaned forward a little and asked, "And if I say no?" Henry smiled a little. "After that, you return to the streets and continue to eke out a living while battling hunger and the cold. You have a choice." His words struck like a hammer. She hated the truth in them even more than she hated him for being so direct. She knew he had put her in a tight spot. She had one more question, though. She insisted, "Why are you doing this? With all your money, why don't a man like you adopt a child or find a wealthy woman who enjoys flaunting her ideal children?" Henry inhaled deeply before responding in a tone that was more solemn than before. "Because I want an heir of my own blood, something that is mine. Additionally, I'm unwilling to handle the complications that come with adopting or interacting with someone in my social circle. Layla, I want to be in charge. Not a bit more, not a bit less." She looked away, uneasy at the coldness of his words. She felt even more exposed because she knew he was telling the truth. In an attempt to regain some control, she finally said, "I need time to think." Henry gave a nod, as though anticipating this reaction. "You have a day. Don't bother getting in touch with me after that." Without saying another word, he got up and moved toward the door. Lila felt as if she were being drawn into a maelstrom from which she might never emerge as she watched him vanish. Walking through the streets, Lee's thoughts raced. Henry's words echoed in her mind. Comfort, stability, a new life. She knew all too well what it meant to have nothing. The biting cold of the night stung her skin, a reminder that tomorrow would bring the same struggles. The fight for food, the constant fear, and the humiliation of being invisible to the world. She sat on a park bench, staring at the overcast sky. Her mother used to say that opportunities only knock once, and it's up to you to decide whether to seize them or let them slip away. But what cost? She wondered. Having a child, even as part of a deal, was a monumental decision. But what if it was her only chance to escape the endless cycle of misery? Meanwhile, Henry sat in his living room, reviewing a contract his lawyers had meticulously prepared. He hated waiting, but he knew Layla didn't have many options. Regardless, he had already calculated the risks. If she declined, he'd move on to someone else. Simple as that. The sound of the intercom interrupted his thoughts. He picked up, hearing his receptionist inform him that Lila had arrived. "Send her up," he replied, his tone neutral. Minutes later, the door opened, and Lila walked in. Her eyes were tired, but determined. "I accept," she said bluntly. Before Henry could say anything, he stood up, observing her carefully. There was no hesitation in her expression, just a firm decision. Great. Let's make this official, he said, motioning for her to sit while he picked up the contract from the table. Lila looked at the document, reading the terms carefully. The conditions were clear. She would be taken care of throughout the pregnancy, with all her expenses paid, and in the end, she would receive a significant amount to restart her life. In return, she would give up any rights to the child. This seems final, she murmured as she read. That's exactly what I want, Henry replied. And I hope it's what you want too. Layla took a deep breath and, after a moment of hesitation, picked up the pen. With a quick motion, she signed her name, sealing the agreement that would change their lives forever. The signing of the contract sealed more than just a deal. It marked a new phase in Lila Parker's life. That same day, she was escorted by Stephanie, Henry's assistant, to a black car waiting at the building's entrance. As she looked out the car window, the city, which had once felt overwhelming, now seemed to offer something different, a chance to start over. Layla didn't speak much during the ride to Henry's mansion, but Stephanie tried to break the silence. You like the place. It's quiet, spacious, and most importantly, comfortable. The friendly tone contrasted with the cold environment of the contract she had just signed. Leah just nodded, still processing everything that had happened in the past few hours. When the car finally arrived at the mansion, her eyes widened. The monumental iron gate opened, revealing a property surrounded by impeccably maintained gardens. At the center was the mansion, an imposing structure of marble and glass that seemed as cold and calculating as the man who owned it. Stephanie led her inside, and Layla barely had time to take in the extravagant details: crystal chandeliers, wide marble staircases, and furniture that looked like it came straight out of a design magazine. It made her uncomfortable. This wasn't her world, but for now, it would be her new reality. I'll show you to your room, Stephanie said with a smile. It's one of the best suites in the house. Layla followed in silence. Upon entering the room, she was greeted by a huge bed with linen sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a bathroom larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. If you need anything, just call me. We're here to take care of you, Stephanie added before leaving her alone. Leah sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the soft fabric of the sheets. It was strange. Until yesterday, she had been sleeping on cold sidewalks, and now she was surrounded by luxury. But as comfortable as it was, there was still something heavy in the air. She knew she wasn't a guest. She was part of a business deal that in the days that followed. Layla tried to adjust to the new routine. Meals were served promptly, and a team of doctors was hired to conduct initial exams. As expected, Henry kept his distance. He was focused on work, rarely appearing around the house except to check the report Stephanie gave him on Lila's progress. On one of those rare occasions when they crossed paths in the hallway, Leah was leaving a medical appointment when she saw Henry walking toward her with his usual impeccable posture and serious look. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone more out of obligation than concern. Leah hesitated before answering. "Everything is as expected, I guess." He nodded, not deepening the conversation. However, before walking away, he gave her one last look. "If you need anything, ask Stephanie. I want you to be well." She didn't know what to make of that comment. Was it genuine kindness, or just a way to ensure the agreement went smoothly? Either way, that brief encounter lingered in her mind. Although she was being treated like a queen, Layla couldn't ignore the dilemmas that began to arise within her. During a silent night, she walked to the balcony of her room and looked at the vast garden illuminated by the moonlight. Everything was so calm, so far from the reality she knew. "Am I doing the right thing?" she thought, hugging herself against the cold wind. The idea of carrying a child and then giving it away seemed increasingly complex. Although the contract made it clear she would have no rights to the child, she didn't know how she would handle it emotionally. Meanwhile, Henry watched everything from a distance. He knew Lila was resilient, but he also recognized that she carried significant emotional weight. Despite his cold demeanor, he felt a faint twinge of curiosity about her. Who was this woman who had accepted such an unusual proposal? And why couldn't he completely shake the feeling that maybe she was more than just part of a plan? One evening, Lila was in the living room, browsing through a book from a shelf. She wasn't a fan of classic literature, but there was something comforting about the quiet of the house and the scent of old books. Henry walked in, surprising her. He seemed distracted, holding a folder of documents in his hand. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said, stopping in the middle of the room. "I didn't expect you to talk to me," she replied with a sarcastic smile. He frowned, but didn't respond right away. Instead, he placed the folder on the table and sat down in a nearby armchair. "Are you settling in?" he asked, crossing his arms. "I think so," she answered hesitantly, "but it still feels strange. It doesn't feel real." Henry leaned forward slightly. "It does have to feel strange. This is a contract, Layla, an agreement. I assure you, everything will be carried out exactly as planned." "That's what you do, isn't it?" she said with a hint of defiance. "Plan everything, calculate everything, leave no room for mistakes." He looked at her closely, as if deciding whether the conversation was worth continuing. "That's how I've built everything I have. Planning prevents failure," he finally replied. Layla gave a short laugh, shaking her head. "Sometimes failure is inevitable. You can plan everything, but you can't control how you feel." Henry's words hit him like a blow. He leaned back in the chair without replying. Lila noticed his reaction, but didn't push further. She simply picked up the book from the shelf and headed to her room, leaving Henry alone deep in thought. The days went by, and Leah Parker began adjusting to life in Henry Lewis's mansion. While the environment was grand and comfortable, she couldn't shake the feeling of not belonging. Every expensive piece of furniture, every decorative object seemed to scream that this wasn't her place. Still, she followed the routine, frequent medical appointments, meals prepared by chefs. Despite the comfort, an emotional emptiness lingered. At night, alone in her room, she thought about what she had left behind. Not that it was much, but it was the only life she had known. Now everything felt out of control. What would it be like to carry a child and then hand it over? She tried to push those thoughts away, but they haunted her, especially in the stillness of the night. While Lila grappled with her internal conflicts, Henry watched her from a distance. He maintained a reserved demeanor, but found himself curious. Even amidst his commitments and meetings, he often caught himself thinking about her. It wasn't romantic or emotional, at least not yet, but a curiosity he couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, returning home after a long day of meetings, Henry found Lila in the garden. She was sitting on a bench, her face turned toward the sky. The scene contrasted with the tough image he had of her. For a moment, he hesitated to approach, but eventually walked over to her. "Enjoying the garden?" he asked in his firm, direct tone. Lila turned slightly, surprised, but quickly responded, "It's nice, definitely better than the streets." He sat beside her, keeping some distance. There was something disarming about Lila's honesty. "Are you settling in?" he asked. Lila shrugged, looking at the flowers in front of her. "It still feels strange, like I'm living someone else's life." Henry remained silent for a moment before replying, "It's all part of the agreement. I want you to have everything you need so things go as planned." "As planned," she echoed with a hint of irony. "Do you always live like this, planning every second of your life?" Henry looked at her, surprised by the question. He was used to people who simply agreed with him, who never challenged him. "Planning is what keeps everything running," he said firmly. "Without it, everything falls apart." Layla gave a faint smile, shaking her head. "I don't think everything can be controlled. Sometimes things just happen, whether you want them to or not." Her words unsettled him more than he expected. He stood up abruptly, ending the conversation. "If you need anything, let Stephanie know," he said before heading back inside the house. That a few days later, Henry decided to accompany Lila to one of her medical appointments. He justified his presence by saying he wanted to ensure everything was going well, but deep down, he felt a growing responsibility for the situation. Lila showed no surprise, but was inwardly intrigued by his decision. At the doctor's office, the usual examinations were conducted, and for the first time, they heard the baby's heartbeat. Layla felt a wave of unexpected emotion. Her eyes filled with tears, but she tried to hide it. Henry, on the other hand, remained still. His expression was hard to read, but something in his gaze had changed. It was as if that simple sound had touched something inside him that he wasn't prepared to face. "Everything looks perfect," said the doctor, smiling. "You can start thinking about what you want to do next, like prenatal care and the next steps." Leah nodded, but Henry remained silent. On the way back to the mansion, the silence in the car was heavy. Henry was visibly thoughtful, and Lila couldn't find the right words to fill the space between them. When they finally arrived, he opened the door for her, a simple gesture that surprised her. "Thank you for today," Layla said as she got out of the car. "It was the least I could do," Henry replied, not looking directly at her. "I'll make sure everything continues to go well." Lila watched him as he walked into the mansion. His posture was always impeccable, but there was something different about him. Maybe the sound of the heartbeat had touched a part of Henry that he kept hidden, or maybe it was just her imagination. In the following days, Layla began to notice small changes. Henry appeared more frequently in the common areas of the house, and their conversations, though brief, seemed less mechanical. He asked about the details of her appointments, how she was feeling, and even suggested activities to help her relax. One night, while they were dining in silence at the large dining table, Henry broke the habit and asked, "Have you thought about what you want to do after all this is over?" Lila was surprised by the question. It was the first time he had shown any interest in her future. "I don't have any plans," she replied honestly. "I still don't know what my life will be like after this." Henry nodded, seeming to consider her answer. "You'll have the resources to start over wherever you want. Just make sure you do something worthwhile." Layla looked at him, intrigued. Behind the calculated coldness, there seemed to be a trace of genuine concern. She didn't know how to interpret it, but for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone in the mansion. One morning, Layla found a package left at the entrance of her room. It was a gift, wrapped impeccably, with a small handwritten note, "To help with your free time." Inside was a new sketchbook and high-quality pencils. Layla was speechless. She didn't know that Henry knew about her love for drawing. During one of their early conversations, she had casually mentioned how she used to draw to distract herself, but she never expected him to remember, let alone care. That night, while she was in the garden, Henry passed by her and stopped for a moment. "Did you like the gift?" he asked casually. "Yes," Leah replied, holding the sketchbook. "Thank you. I didn't expect this." Henry shrugged. "It seemed like something that could be good for you." Layla smiled, holding the gift more firmly. "It was," she replied simply. Layla began to realize that the routine in the mansion, despite being well-planned and comfortable, was not enough to dispel the internal conflict surrounding her. Each day brought a new sense of emptiness, as if she were physically present but disconnected from what was happening around her. While Henry maintained his usual firm demeanor, Layla felt there was something more to the man that he didn't let show. One morning, she was surprised by an unexpected request from Henry. He wanted them to talk after breakfast, something that seemed atypical given the distance he usually maintained. Once they finished, Layla met him in the sitting room, where he waited next to a stack of papers. "I want to discuss some additional details of the contract," he said directly. Layla's heart tightened, imagining he was about to impose new conditions. "More details? I thought everything was already settled," she replied, trying to hide her tension. Henry watched her for a moment before continuing. "It's nothing that changes the terms. I just want to ensure you understand how things will be after the birth. I want to avoid any surprises." Layla took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I think I get it. I'll leave, and you'll go on with your life." He gave a small nod. "Yes, but I want you to know that if you need anything afterward, regardless of the agreement, I'll be available to help. I don't want you to feel abandoned." She raised an eyebrow, surprised by the offer. His tone was different, as if he was trying to show consideration that hadn't been there before. "That's unexpected coming from you," she said, unable to hide her sarcasm. Henry just shrugged. "I don't want complications, and this is the best way to avoid them." Layla chuckled, but there was something about his seriousness that made her reconsider her sarcasm. Maybe he really was trying to be different, even if he didn't quite know how. Later that day, Layla decided to explore the mansion further. The place was immense, with seemingly endless hallways and rooms decorated with artwork that probably cost more than she could imagine. As she wandered, she came across a small study at the end of a hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and she peeked inside. Henry was sitting at the desk, but he didn't seem to be working. He was holding a framed photograph in his hands, staring at it. Layla couldn't make out the details of the image, but something about his posture caught her attention. It was the first time she'd seen him like this, vulnerable, lost in thought. She knocked softly on the door, and he quickly set the photograph back on the desk. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she said hesitantly. Henry looked up, clearly surprised to see her. "It's nothing," he replied, returning to his neutral expression. "Did you need something?" "No, I was just exploring the house." Leah hesitated, feeling like she should say more. "You seemed like you were thinking about something important." Henry stayed silent for a moment before replying, "We all have things we'd rather keep to ourselves." Sensing he didn't want to continue that topic, she shifted the conversation. "This house is huge. Do you live here alone all the time?" He nodded, crossing his arms. "It's more practical than it seems. I don't like distractions, and here I have the space I need." Leah studied him for a moment, trying to understand how someone could live surrounded by so much luxury and yet seem so lonely. "That must be strange," she said without much thought. "Having all this but no one to share it with." Henry looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm used to it. I don't need anyone to do what I do." Leah wanted to believe him, but something in his tone suggested otherwise. Before she could respond, Henry stood up. "If you need anything, Stephanie can help," he said, ending the conversation. That night, Lila went out to the mansion's terrace. The sky was clear, and the city lights twinkled in the distance. Sitting there, she let her mind wander. She thought about the sound of the baby's heartbeat she had heard during the checkup, a sound that had affected her in ways she couldn't explain. As much as she tried to maintain emotional distance, it was becoming harder. When she heard footsteps behind her, Layla turned and saw Henry. He looked tired, but still carried that same rigid posture. "You like this spot, don't you?" he asked as he approached. "I like the silence," she replied. "It helps me think." He stopped beside her, gazing at the city lights for a moment before speaking. "Thinking isn't always a good thing," Leah laughed, but without much humor. "Try telling that to someone who spends most of their time alone." Henry didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "Sometimes being surrounded by people doesn't help much either." Leah glanced at him, noticing a sadness in his words she hadn't heard before. "Maybe you need something you can't control, Henry," she said without filtering her thoughts. She didn't regret it. He frowned, as if he wanted to respond, but decided against it. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Lila with her own thoughts. In the weeks that followed, Layla realized that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't maintain a solid barrier between herself and Henry. He remained enigmatic, but there were moments when small fragments of his true self seemed to slip through. And while she tried to keep her distance, something within her wanted to understand the man who had brought her into this world. At the same time, Henry found himself grappling with emotions he couldn't name. He had entered this agreement expecting simplicity and control, but now he was beginning to see that this was far more complex. Layla wasn't just part of a plan, and that scared him. The following week, it was time for another checkup. Leah woke up early, feeling a mix of anxiety and curiosity. The months were passing faster than she had imagined, and the idea of seeing the babies for the first time, even on a screen, made her heart race. She wondered if Henry would be there for this appointment, as he had been the last time. When she came down for breakfast, she found Stephanie going over the schedule with Henry. "Ready?" Henry asked, looking up from the folder of documents in front of him. "Ready enough," Leah replied, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "Great. We'll go together," he said, not giving any more explanations, but his tone left no room for discussion. Layla headed to the car, feeling the silence between them heavier than usual. Henry, as always, was focused, but there was something different in his demeanor. Maybe he was as nervous as she was, though he would never admit. I could see the doctor's office. The physician greeted them with a warm smile. He motioned for Layla to lie down while he prepared the ultrasound equipment. "Today we'll get a clearer view of the baby," the doctor explained, adjusting the monitor. Leah looked at the screen, tried to ignore the cold gel the doctor was applying to her abdomen. When the transducer began to glide over her skin, she held her breath anxious about what was to come. Henry, standing beside her, crossed his arms, keeping his eyes fixed on the monitor. Then the sound came, the strong, steady rhythm of heartbeats. Not just one, but two. "Well, here's the surprise we couldn't see last time," the doctor said, pointing to the screen. "You're expecting twins." Lee's eyes widened in surprise. Twins. She had never considered that possibility. She felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mix of shock and joy. Instinctively, she placed a hand on her belly, trying to process the news. Henry, for his part, remained silent for a few seconds. His serious expression gave way to something Lila had never seen before, genuine awe. He leaned slightly forward, watching the screen intently. "Two?" he asked, as if needing confirmation. "Two," the doctor replied with a smile. "Both seem healthy and are growing well." The silence that followed was filled only with the sound of the heartbeats echoing in the room. For Lila, that moment was magical. No matter how hard she tried to remain emotionally distant, she couldn't help but feel connected to the two lives inside her. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who get here will understand. Now, let's continue with the story. Henry, standing beside her, seemed equally moved. He remained quiet, but his eyes revealed something that words couldn't express. For the first time, he seemed vulnerable, touched by the idea of becoming a father to two. On the way back to the mansion, the silence between them was different. It wasn't the usual cold and distant silence, but something laden with meaning. Layla finally broke the silence. "You don't seem like the kind of person who gets easily surprised," she commented, trying to lighten the tension. Henry sighed, his eyes fixed on the road. "I'm not, but this," he paused, choosing his words, "is different." Leah glanced at him, intrigued. Henry rarely showed emotions, but now he seemed lost in thought. "Is it scary?" she asked, almost in a whisper. He turned slightly to look at her before answering. "No, it's impressive. Knowing that in a few months, two completely new beings will be here, depending on me." Lila felt a pang of pain in her chest. She knew that eventually she would have to let go of those babies, but hearing him talk about them with such care made her realize how connected she already was to them. "They also depend on me. At least for now," she said, trying to hide the emotion in her voice. Henry nodded. "I know, and that's why I want to make sure you're okay, Layla, not just physically, but in every way that's important to me." She stayed silent, absorbing his words. It was the first time he had spoken so sincerely about what they were going through together. Later that night, Lila was on the terrace, looking at the horizon when Henry appeared again. He seemed hesitant, something rare in his usually confident demeanor. "I can't stop thinking about what the doctor said today," he began, sitting next to her. "Two babies, two futures." Leah turned to him, surprised by his openness. "It's a lot of responsibility, isn't it?" she asked. "It's more than that," Henry said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is the first time I feel like something in my life can't be calculated. I can't plan who these two will become. I can't control who they'll grow into." Layla felt a chill hearing those words. It was rare for Henry to admit that something was beyond his control. She realized that, like her, he was changing, albeit reluctantly. "Sometimes that could be a good thing," she said. "It can bring things you never imagined." Henry looked at her as though he were considering her words for the first time. He seemed to be accepting the idea that not everything in life could be planned. In the following days, the news about the twins brought an unexpected lightness to the mansion. Stephanie began making adjustments to the nursery that had been prepared, now adapting it for two. Layla watched the transformations with mixed feelings. She knew the agreement required her to give up the babies, but deep down, she realized it would be far harder than she had imagined. As preparations continued, Lila and Henry started to see that the contract that had united them was turning into something far more complicated. The twins, not even born yet, were already reshaping their lives in ways neither of them had foreseen. The days following the revelation of the twins brought a subtle yet significant shift in Lila and Henry's dynamic. Though he remained the same methodical and reserved man, small gestures began to emerge, revealing a side of him Lila hadn't expected. One afternoon, after a medical appointment, Henry insisted on escorting her to the car, something he would typically leave to Stephanie or another staff member. "Are you okay?" he asked, holding the car door open for her. Leah nodded, surprised by the gesture. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you." On the drive back to the mansion, their usual silence was broken when Henry asked, "Is there anything you need? Anything that might make you more comfortable?" Layla glanced at him, trying to read his expression. It didn't feel like a superficial concern. There was something more genuine about it, though she wasn't sure how to interpret it yet. "Nothing to worry about now. But thank you for asking," she replied cautiously. He nodded and returned his focus to the road, but Leah sensed that something was shifting. Despite her reservations, Henry seemed genuinely concerned about her. Back at the mansion, Leah noticed more signs of change. One day, she found a set of new pillows and blankets in her room, accompanied by a simple note, "To help you rest better." She couldn't help but smile at the gesture. It was a small act, but carried meaning. Later, as she sipped tea in the living room, Henry entered and quietly sat in the armchair opposite her. He seemed more relaxed than usual, though still maintained his serious demeanor. "Did you like what I left in your room?" he asked bluntly. "Yes, I did. It was thoughtful of you," Leah replied, studying him curiously. "Good. I want to make sure you're comfortable." "That's important to me," he said without looking away. Leah frowned slightly. As much as she appreciated the kindness, there was still a barrier of mistrust she couldn't quite overcome. "You're changing, Henry, or at least it seems that way. But I still don't know why," she said directly. He stared at her for a moment, as if deciding what to say. Finally, he sighed. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am changing. But the truth is, I don't know how to be different. I'm not used to caring." The words seemed to surprise him as much as they did her. It was rare to see Henry admit any vulnerability, but there he was, revealing a part of himself that always seemed locked away. That night, Layla reflected on the conversation while gazing at the sky from the terrace. Henry wasn't what she had expected. He was still hard to figure out, but there was something human beneath that controlling exterior. She just didn't know if that was a good or bad thing. Meanwhile, Henry was in his office, staring at the contract that defined his arrangement with Lila. For the first time, he felt the weight of that document. He had started this with a clear goal, to have an heir and move on with his life. But now things weren't so simple. He knew he was starting to care, and that terrified him. The next morning, Henry joined Lila for breakfast, something he rarely did. "There's something I'd like to discuss," he said directly. Lila looked up curious. "What is it?" He hesitated before answering. "I know you still don't trust me, and I can't blame you. I've never been good at trusting people, and that's turned me into someone who maybe isn't easy to deal with." Layla stayed silent, letting him continue. "I've had experiences that taught me not to depend on anyone, to not let anyone get close enough to hurt me. But with you, with what we're building, I realized that maybe I'm wrong." She blinked, surprised by his honesty. It was rare to hear Henry talk about himself this way. "We all have our barriers, Henry," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean we need to hide behind them forever." He nodded, seeming to consider her words. "Maybe you're right, but changing isn't easy for me." Lila gave a small smile. "No one said it would be." Later that day, Henry decided to join her for a walk in the garden. They talked about trivial things at first, but the conversation soon returned to the babies. "Have you thought about names?" he asked, surprising her. "No, not yet. I thought that was something you'd want to decide on your own," she replied. "I think it would be fair to do it together," he said, to Lee's amazement. She realized that Henry was trying to be more open, more present. And while she was still cautious, she couldn't ignore that he was making an effort. As the sun set, they sat on a bench in the garden, watching the warm colors of the sky. "I never imagined I'd be here, doing something like this," Layla said almost to herself. "Neither did I," Henry responded with a slight smile. "But maybe this is exactly where we need to be." Leah looked at him, noticing that for the first time, Henry seemed to be letting his guard down. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance that this wasn't just a contract, but the beginning of something much bigger. The morning started like any other. Lila felt the weight of the months of pregnancy in every movement, but she was determined to keep her routine. Henry, as usual, was in the office, buried in documents. Their interactions, now more frequent, had become a kind of silent comfort for both. But that day, something was different. Just before lunch, Layla felt a sudden pain. It was different from any discomfort she had felt before. She tried to ignore it, thinking it was just another typical pregnancy ache, but the intensity increased. Alarmed, she called Stephanie, who immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. "Henry needs to know about this," Stephanie said, helping Lila to sit down. "This could be the start of labor." Layla nodded, trying to control her breathing as another wave of pain hit her. Stephanie went to get Henry, who appeared in the room within minutes. Seeing her, his usually impassive face showed something rare, genuine concern. "Layla, what's happening?" he asked, quickly approaching. "I think it's happening," she said, gasping. "The babies are coming." For a moment, Henry seemed frozen, but he quickly regained control. He grabbed the phone, ordering the driver to get the car ready and instructing Stephanie to gather everything they would need for the hospital. "We're going now," he said, his voice firm but with a touch of urgency that Lila had never heard before. The ride to the hospital was a blur of emotions. Lila focused on managing the pain, while Henry, sitting next to her, watched with a mix of anxiety and determination. He held her hand during the trip, a gesture that seemed automatic but was full of meaning. "We're almost there," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "You'll be okay. We'll be okay." Layla didn't respond, but she felt a strange calm from his words. The hospital. Everything happened quickly. A medical team was already on standby, thanks to Henry's meticulous planning, and Lila was taken straight to the delivery room. He stayed by her side the entire time, refusing to leave despite the staff's attempts to get him to wait outside. "I'm staying," he said firmly, holding Lila's hand. "I'm not going anywhere." During the hours that followed, Henry witnessed something he never imagined: Lee's strength as she brought the twins into the world. Each moment seemed endless, but also filled with an intensity he had never experienced. Finally, the first cry filled the room. The sound was both small and powerful, reverberating like a wave of emotion. "A boy," the doctor announced, smiling. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Henry felt his heart race. He couldn't take his eyes off the baby being carefully placed on a nearby table. Before he could fully process what was happening, a second cry filled the room. "A girl," the doctor said. "Your daughter." Layla, exhausted but with eyes shining, looked at the two babies being gently cleaned and wrapped in blankets. She wanted to hold them, but she knew the moment would be brief. Henry stood frozen for a few seconds, watching the doctor's work. Then, as if something inside him had finally given way, he stepped closer to Lila, took her hand, and said, "You were incredible. Thank you." Silent tears streamed down Lila's face, but she couldn't tell if they were from joy, relief, or a heart already beginning to break. Soon after the babies were handed to her, Leah held them carefully, feeling the warmth and fragility of their small lives. She studied them, taking in every detail, their closed eyes, tiny fingers moving involuntarily. It was an overwhelming love, and she knew it would be impossible to leave them without carrying a part of them forever. Henry stayed by her side, silent but visibly moved. When he finally held the boy in his arms, his hardened expression softened in a way Layla had never seen before. He seemed to connect with something far beyond the idea of an heir. It was life in its purest form, a bond he had never experienced. When he held the girl, Henry closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to imprint the moment into his memory. When he opened them, he looked at Lila, and she saw something she never expected: genuine gratitude. "They're perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Leah nodded, still holding the boy. Tears fell freely now, but she didn't care. That night, while Lila rested in her room, Henry stayed by the baby's side in the hospital observation area. He watched them sleep, feeling a flood of emotions he didn't know how to control. For the first time, he realized these children weren't just part of a plan or a legacy. They were his connection to something greater, something he had never allowed himself to feel before: true love. Stephanie arrived, carrying coffee. She placed the cup on a nearby table and gently asked, "Mr. Lewis, is everything all right?" Henry looked at her, clearly struggling to find the right words. "For the first time in a long while, I think it is," he replied. Stephanie smiled and left, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his children. Meanwhile, Leah woke up in her room, feeling a heavy loneliness. As much as she wanted to be happy, she knew the contract still loomed over everything. The babies, now the center of her existence, wouldn't be hers for much longer. But when she looked at the door and saw Henry walking in with both babies in his arms, something inside her shifted. He looked different, as if that moment had transformed not just his relationship with the babies, but also with her. He approached the bed, handed her the boy, and sat beside her, holding the girl. "I don't know how, but this has changed everything," he confessed, looking at the twins. Layla nodded, knowing that no matter how difficult what came next would be, this moment was a miracle she would never forget. Months later, Henry's mansion was steeped in a heavy silence. Leah knew what the day meant. The weeks following the twins' birth had been a mix of joy and anguish. She loved them more than she ever thought possible, but the contract was clear. Her time there was coming to an end. Today was the day she was supposed to leave everything behind. As she packed her few belongings into a small suitcase, Lila glanced at the babies' cribs where they still slept peacefully. Tears threatened to fall, but she refused to cry. She didn't want her last memories to be marked by weakness. She knew what she had signed and tried to convince herself it was the right thing to do. Stephanie knocked softly on the door, entering with a worried expression. "Is everything ready?" she asked quietly. Lila nodded, swallowing her emotions. "Yes, thank you for everything, Stephanie." The assistant looked at her, hesitating before speaking. "Are you sure this is what you want? It seems like there's something more between you and Mr. Lewis." Layla forced a smile, though her heart felt heavy. "It's not about what I want. It's about what was agreed upon." Stephanie didn't press further. She simply left the room, promising to let Henry know Lila was ready to leave. When she came down the stairs with her suitcase in hand, Leah found Henry waiting in the foyer. He was standing by the front door, his eyes fixed on her. There was no trace of the cold, calculating man she had met at the beginning. The Henry standing there seemed different, vulnerable, as if he was about to lose something important. "Everything's ready," Lila said, breaking the silence. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step toward her, his gaze intense. "Are you really leaving?" he asked, his voice low, almost hoarse. Lila felt a lump in her throat, but remained firm. "That was the deal. I've done my part. Now it's time to move on." Henry stood still for a moment before reaching into the inside pocket of his coat and pulling out the contract. He held the document between his fingers as if it was something insignificant. "This contract," he began, his voice steadier now, "should never have defined what's happening between us." Before Lila could respond, Henry tore the paper into pieces, letting them fall to the floor. The sound echoed through the foyer like a declaration. "I don't want you to go, Leah. I don't want this to end here." Layla froze, her eyes fixed on the pieces of paper on the floor. Her heart raced, but pain and fear kept her hesitant. "Henry, you can't just tear up a contract and expect that to change everything. It's not that simple." He took another step toward her, his expression full of emotion. "I know it's not simple. Nothing about this has been simple for me. But these past few months have shown me something I never had the courage to admit. I need you, Layla. Not just because of the twins, but because you brought something into my life that I didn't even know was missing." His words hit her hard, but she shook her head, trying to resist. "And how do I know this is real?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How can I trust that you won't change your mind, that you won't pull away when things get tough?" Henry took a deep breath, seeming to struggle with his own insecurities. "Because I've already tried living without feeling anything for anyone, and it left me empty. You showed me that I don't need to be afraid of connecting, of being human. And yes, it scares me, but I don't want to lose this." "Lose you?" Tears streamed down Layla's face, but there was still a barrier she couldn't overcome. "I fell in love with you, Henry," she admitted, her voice choked with emotion. "But you don't understand how hard it is to trust someone again. I've spent my whole life being discarded, ignored. How can I believe you won't do the same? Henry moved closer, now so near that she could feel his breath. Because you changed everything for me, and I'm not the kind of man who says that lightly. I don't know how to prove it to you, Leah, but I'm willing to try every day for the rest of my life if you give me that chance. His words were like a blow to her defenses. Layla felt something inside her about to give way. She knew there were risks, but for the first time, she considered that maybe it was worth facing them. What if it doesn't work out? She asked, almost in a whisper. Henry took her hands, looking directly into her eyes. Then we'll try again and again if necessary. I won't give up on you, Lila. Never. The world seemed to stop. Lila felt her doubts begin to fade, replaced by something stronger. Hope. She looked at Henry, realizing that he was truly willing to let go of his control, his barriers, to be with her. Finally, she nodded, letting the tears fall freely. Okay, I'll stay. Henry let out a sigh of relief and pulled her into a tight embrace. For the first time, Lila felt that this was where she was meant to be. The day was just breaking at Henry's mansion. Lila woke to the soft sounds of the twins in the nursery next door. There was something different about that morning. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the weight of uncertainty or the tension of living under the terms of a contract. She had chosen to stay, and more importantly, Henry had chosen to open his heart, allowing them to build something together. Lila got up and went to the nursery. She found the two little ones awake, cooing softly as they moved in their cribs. She leaned over each of them, stroking their rosy cheeks and whispering words of affection. Before she could get lost in the moment, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Henry. He stood in the doorway, watching the scene with a slight smile. His eyes, which had always conveyed control and distance, were now softer, filled with something Lila could only describe as love. Good morning, he said, stepping into the room and approaching the babies. Good morning, Layla said. As Henry picked up the baby boy in his arms, he looked at the baby with a sparkle in his eyes. I don't think I ever imagined this moment would feel so natural, he confessed, almost to himself. Layla smiled, watching him grow into his role as a father. There was something deeply fulfilling about seeing him so devoted to the twins. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment. Henry, though inexperienced, made an effort to learn how to care for the babies, helping Lila whenever he could. He changed diapers, though he was a bit clumsy at first, gave bottles, and even sang lullabies despite his gruff voice not being the most melodic. For Lila, this dedication was proof that he was truly changing. One evening, as they sat on the couch with the twins sleeping in their cribs nearby, Henry turned to Lila. I've been thinking about something, he said, his expression serious but calm. What is it? She asked, curious. He took a deep breath before continuing. I want us to be a real family, not just because of the twins, but because I want you by my side forever. Lila was silent, taken aback by the intensity of his words. She knew their feelings for each other had grown, but hearing that confession was something she hadn't expected. Henry, this is a big step, she replied, trying to process the moment. Are you sure? He took her hands, looking deeply into her eyes. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I know this won't be easy, and I know I made mistakes in the beginning, but I want to build something with you, something that's not based on contracts or obligations, but on love. His words were sincere, and Lila knew it. Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded. I want that too. Henry let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Try, he said. A few weeks later, an intimate ceremony was held in the mansion's gardens. Only a few close people were invited, including Stephanie and other staff members who had become an important part of their journey. The day was perfect, with the sun shining and a gentle breeze moving through the flowers that decorated the venue. Layla wore a simple yet elegant dress, while Henry looked sharp in a suit. The twins, dressed adorably, were in Stephanie's arms, who couldn't hide her tears of joy. When Henry and Lila exchanged vows, they both spoke from the heart. Henry promised to be the man she deserved, someone who would always stand by her, no matter what. Leah, in turn, promised to trust him and help him become the best version of himself. At the end of the ceremony, As they stood embracing each other while holding the twins, Stephanie remarked, "You make a beautiful family." And it was true. For the first time, Henry, Layla, and the babies were exactly where they were meant to be. After the ceremony, life continued with its challenges, but also with moments of joy. Henry and Lila worked together to create a warm, loving home for the twins. They learned to be parents, facing sleepless nights and constant demands with a mix of exhaustion and happiness. One night, as Lila was putting the babies to bed, Henry appeared at the bedroom door. He walked up to her and, without saying a word, wrapped her in a tight embrace. Lila rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become so familiar. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said softly. "Thank you for showing me I could trust again," she replied. Months later, on a sunny afternoon, Henry and Lila were in the garden, watching the twins play on a soft mat in the grass. The baby's laughter filled the air, spreading pure, infectious joy. Leah turned to Henry, who was sitting beside her, and saw him smiling. "Are you happy?" she asked, genuinely curious. He looked at her and then at the twins before answering, "I never thought I could be this happy. You've given me more than I ever knew I needed," Leah said. "A family, a purpose, love." Layla smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "And you've shown me that love can be built even through challenges." "Thank you for that." As they leaned in for a gentle kiss, the twins began to babble, something that sounded like Mama and Dada. Henry and Lila laughed, overwhelmed with emotion, and moved closer to the little ones, wrapping them in all the love they had. That moment, simple and unassuming, was proof they had found something real. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was full of love, understanding, and hope, and that was all they needed to move forward. What did you think of Henry's actions? Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep up with all our stories. Don't forget to check out more touching stories by clicking here on the end screen.